Hi, Professor Veronica Manlow here again, doing the second video. The first one that I did was on race, and this video and PowerPoint that accompanies it is going to be on social class and the importance of social class. Many of us don't tend to think that social class is very important. We tend to think, oh, we're all middle class. But today we're going to talk about that feature because, again, in terms of marketing, we talked about how race, how ethnicity, how religion could be important. And social class is certainly an important thing. If you think about yourself as a consumer, right, what's the first thing you think about? Do I have enough money to afford something? And for some people who have trust funds, who have, very high executive pays, salaries, for them, stocks, all types of benefits like that, perhaps it's not really a consideration at all. So certainly we each belong to a social class, and that affects us as an individual, affects us as a consumer. So we're going to look at some classical theories, we're going to look at various approaches to understanding what social class is, and then we each have to think about how does it affect us in our life, what is our particular orientation as a consumer based on class, and how does that intersect with race, how does that intersect with ethnicity and with other factors. So now we're talking about stratification with a particular emphasis on social class. So in a society, people can be divided or ranked according to any criteria. It could be race. In some societies, race may be important. In some societies, ethnicity. It could be social class. So let's think about the importance of social class. And what is social class first? It's a mix of income, education, wealth, occupation. We can look at all of those things together, and also maybe cultural habits and skills come into play. So it's complicated. Today, people certainly have more luxuries at every level. So in the past, it was very clear, right? You had a very big distinction, and in some countries, certainly you still do. For example, in Brazil, where you don't really have a very large, vast middle class, and social mobility may be much harder. So in the past, privileges are inherited, so it's ascribed. And today, we have a belief in merit, we have a belief that with talent, with hard work, that one can move up the social class ladder. Screen 2. We're going to look at some classical theories of social class. And one of the most important ones to know about is Karl Marx's theory of social class. And he has in some ways, you can say, a very simple theory of social class. And he believed that, or he divided up the world into basically two classes. So you had a capitalist society where social stratification is based on a single economic dimension. Those who control the means of production, the people who own the factories, who own the businesses, they're on top. And those who have to sell their labor were the oppressed class. So that's a very simple two-structured class system that Marx looked at. 3. How does Marx look at class? So it's a single economic dimension. So there's nothing else that really comes into play. He doesn't really look at privilege. He doesn't look at other issues. He just looks at the economic position and divides up the entire system in that way. So again, you have the people who control the means of production, and you have the people who are paid the minimum amount to the proletariat, as he calls them, to sell their labor. And you can look at, if you want to look at that today, just to kind of, again, start thinking about class and understanding it, you can think about, you have executives, you have people who own stocks in the company, who have benefits, perks, extremely high salaries. So that becomes the capitalist class, and then everyone else who's working is part of the working class. Screen 4. Another way of looking at social class. So again, from Marx's perspective, it's very simple. He doesn't concern himself at all with issues or in a kind of socialist approach to looking at class. There's no concern with race, with ethnicity. Those things are considered insignificant because there is no special privilege in the ideal theoretical system of a socialist situation. So there's no clergy, there's no nobility, there is just working class, people that are together working ideally for a same type of, for the same goal. And so when you eliminate private property, the idea is that you eliminate any kind of inequality or injustice. So we can understand theoretically how this kind of model might work. Now, another way of looking at it is to look at, for example, Max Weber. He looked at stratification based on class, but he said it was much more complex than what Marx had proposed. And he said that you don't just have class, you have three dimensions. So yes, you have class, where you have someone's economic position, which is extremely important. That's their position in the marketplace, where that relates to wealth, to property, to money they have in the bank, to stocks that they might own. So that's extremely important. But then you have something else. Next screen. Okay, so the next thing after class that Max Weber talks about is status. And that's something, again, when you looked at Marx's more simple theory, now you see that you have the issue of prestige and social respect that comes in, which complicates things. So for example, Max Weber said you can have a pastor or a rabbi or a priest, somebody who earns a very small salary or maybe even no salary at all, but he or she can have a very, very high status in the community. And we can think of other examples like teachers, like perhaps police officers. These are people with a specialized training, with a specialized position and authority. And so with that degree and with that office that they hold, they earn social respect or social status. So it has nothing to do with their class position, in a sense, right? They may have little income, but they have a very high prestige in the community, in the society. Screen 6. Going back to the issue of status, I just want to give you a few examples. A person can have a lot of money, they can have a high income, but they might not have a high degree of social status. And an example is, let's say, a mafia boss or somebody who's in a gang, or let's say a prostitute. Some prostitutes may be earning $1,000 an hour, but they have no social status, or they have very low social status. And indeed, very few people who are working in these fields, drug dealing, prostitution, are ever going to admit it in polite society, we could say. So you can have a very high class position, a very high income, but very low status. And an interesting example, the Kennedy family, you've probably all heard of President Kennedy, John F. Kennedy. He came from a family, an Irish immigrant family, very poor, who became very wealthy suddenly during the Prohibition in terms of making alcohol and selling alcohol and gaining lots of money from doing that. But the problem was that they had very low status, and the fact that they had been involved in that kind of business really, they were never invited, they were never considered people that anyone wanted to associate with. And so what they did is they traded that status in a series of very well-planned marriages that allowed them to enter into the higher class society. So Jacqueline Kennedy came from a very established, well-to-do, I think aristocratic French family. So she, marrying the president, gave the family a certain type of prestige that they wouldn't have had before that. And we can think also in today's consumer society how status symbols can confer prestige on a person. So owning a Louis Vuitton handbag, right, or wearing Gucci loafers, those are things that people might feel, even if they don't have a very high income, if they don't have a very high status from a position, from education, from connections, maybe what they can do is show those symbols, and it gives the illusion of belonging to that type of status. Screen 7. Also, an important thing to think about is that status can be lost. So we have many, many examples of people from entertainment, from politics, people from popular culture who had very high status, who were respected, who were highly regarded, but because of some actions lost that. And a very good example that you probably heard about, O.J. Simpson. He was really a person, football hero, beloved American icon. People from across the board really had a very high degree of respect for him. And then because of his criminal activities and the scandal, the O.J. Simpson scandal, where he was acquitted for killing his wife, but later most people at least believe that actually he did kill his wife. And so the implication is being implicated in such activities caused him to lose his status, and today he's not going to be someone that any company wants to represent them or that people would look up to in any way. So he kind of fell from grace. So that's an example of how people can lose status, and certainly people can lose economic position, class. If you lose a job, you're no longer, if you don't have a trust fund or you don't have lots of income, you've lost your class position as well. Today, an interesting thing to think about is how very recently it's happened, and this is a new phenomena, in a democratic society where we believe that you can move up and you can change your class position. Today, most people believe that their children are not going to have a higher position than they had, in fact, and that's a reversal, because the idea was always, or the ideal was, that children could surpass their parents, or through attaining credentials, through attaining expertise, you could move into another class status. And today, in fact, it perhaps is working in the reverse. Screen 8. The last thing that Max Weber talks about that's important, and I think that a lot of us can relate to today, he calls party. And that refers to the power that one has through networks or connections. So through the connections we have to influential others. You can think about LinkedIn, you can think about networking events here at Brooklyn College. The idea is that you don't have any status, you don't have any economic power, but you can connect yourself with somebody, maybe through an internship, through, again, through social media like LinkedIn, to a person who does have power. People join parties. Again, the idea of party, the idea that you're connected to something larger than you that generates power. If you're a Democrat, if you're a Republican, you're part of a political party that will give you certain privileges. Right? If you're a member of the press, if you work in certain agencies, UN or Homeland Security, or you're a police officer, being associated with those organizations gives you a particular kind of power. So again, the three different levels that he looks at. Screen 9. Now we're going to look at culture and how culture might come into the equation in an interesting way. And a sociologist, Pierre Bourdieu, looked at social class in terms of economic capital and also social and cultural capital. So this is an interesting idea, because now we're looking at this issue that some people just are dealt a better hand of cards, as we could say. So there are some people who have opportunities, who are born in a certain situation, and we can look at that in terms of economic benefits. If you're born into an upper class family, the likelihood of you remaining in the upper class is very strong. Now, we were just saying how it's changing a bit, and now people who are born in the middle class are falling. And in fact, interesting, there was something, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal not too long ago, about African Americans in the middle class falling out of the middle class at a much higher rate than white Americans, than Hispanic Americans. So then we can look at, again, these other kinds of prejudice, discrimination that might be at play. But again, if you have a certain advantage and you're in a certain group that is privileged, there's going to be ways of maintaining that privilege. And so Pierre Bourdieu talks about this idea of cultural capital. So we have money, right? We have privilege, we might have education, but we also have a kind of symbolic wealth if we're in that upper class lifestyle. So people think about this. They inherit certain skills, they inherit certain habits, and oftentimes that can lead them into very good jobs, positions, education, rewards within the educational system. So that if, let's say, you're in the middle or upper middle class, or even in the upper class, the kinds of people you're going to be dealing with, teachers, are going to respect and are going to be giving you more opportunities, because they're going to feel that you have more potential. So the ideal is to remain in the class that you're in, and your family, your background, the people that you're connected with are promoting you in that, promoting you and pushing you along in that way. Whereas people in the working class don't have the habits, don't have the skills, don't have the opportunities, and the kinds of things that they learn may not be valued. So if you're from an agricultural family, or you're from a family where maybe you learned how to fix cars or do other kinds of things, those things are not going to be valued in the school system. They're not going to be as valued in the workplace as the kinds of connections and skills that upper class or middle class children learn. So when the teacher asks, how did you spend your summer vacation, and you are from an agricultural family, those experiences are not going to be as valued as going to the museum, going to Europe, doing things that are considered appropriate from a middle or upper class standpoint. So he looks at how people are able to maintain their position by factoring out others who don't have those habits, who don't have those experiences, and who don't have those connections. And oftentimes you can look at, for example, in New York City, you have certain kinds of schools that are special schools. They're within the public system, but they've had very, very successful high rates of for example, graduation and students going on to college. And what's happening, so from Bourdieu's point of view, those teachers are passing on a kind of cultural capital to students that maybe students only got in the private schools. So they're teaching them the kinds of skills, the ways to communicate, the activities that are considered acceptable and desirable so that they will be able to move into the middle class and to the upper class. Now we're going to take a look at the distribution of class in the United States. We're going to look at what percentage of people fall into the upper middle class. These are people generally that are high-level professionals, that have graduate degrees. Take a look also at the middle class, people in lower paid professions, then the lower middle class, semi-professionals, working class, blue collar, clerical positions, and then people that are in the poor and underclass. And when you look in terms of education, because education is a very important component of social class, you have a distribution of people who have bachelor's degrees, who have high school degrees. You can see people who have had some college. And again, we've talked about how in the past it might have been very clear if you had a bachelor's degree, companies were recruiting. You had a choice of many, many different companies to join. People didn't have to do internships. They were being courted by many companies. So just having a bachelor's degree was a real form of social capital. Today, it's perhaps taken for granted that you should have at least a bachelor's degree, but there's no guarantee of job. So that's changed a lot. So having a very high degree doesn't always correlate to higher income, but when you go to the master's level, when you go to the PhD level, when you look at people that are in higher level executive positions, it will usually correlate also with status and also with economic privilege. So in conclusion, it's important to think about social class, and it's important to think about how social class affects us as consumers, not only as individuals in terms of identities. Think about the luxury industry. Think about all the different industries and businesses that are catering to the fact that people consider social class important. So where you live, right, where you vacation, the kinds of experiences you have, the kinds of movies that you may go to, all of these things have a connection to social class. And so luxury brands are all too happy to provide people with these vehicles at a very high cost that will allow them to feel that they are in that social class, that they have been achieving, accomplishing, moving up the social ladder.